Okay, thanks very much, Jessica, and really a warm welcome to everybody that's joined this seminar. So we've got a fantastic group of practices and leaders in the field of sustainability with us. And the focus of the topic today is looking at the 2030 challenge. There's been a couple of updates, as you're aware, which we're going to go through in a moment. But really what it is to share actually practical, how do you actually practice this? How do you deliver a 2030 challenge on a current project or future projects, and what do you need to do as a practice, working with collaborators, engineers, clients, and so forth. So there's lots of kind of questions here how we implement this. So I'm joined with, as I said, fantastic group. So we're going to go to HDA Design, and we've got Ben Derbyshire on the line, past president. We've got Rory and Elisabetta. We've also got Head of Sustainability, Louisa from Hawkins Brown, and also Head of Sustainability from BDP, Philip. And so we're going to hear more from them later in the presentation. And then we've got effectively 15 minutes each in terms of practice. And then at the end, we're going to have hopefully 30 minutes of chat where we can actually invite you really to kind of go into the deep questions, all the kind of questions that you really are troubling you in terms of how to implement this. And we've got everybody there that can hopefully give you some guidance. In the background, we've also got two of our RIBA sustainability people. We've got Alex Tate and Jess, who will be on hand to answer the questions in terms of RIBA guidance and policy, and they're around in the chat box. So if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat box, and they will endeavour to answer those. But obviously, if you've got questions for specific panelists, please raise those, and we'll actually ask the panelists as they come up. Okay, so right, I'm just going to share my screen. So computer's going a little bit slowly. Maybe it's the heat. Not in Scotland anyway, but it's down south. But let's. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just introduce just the 2030 challenge again, the changes that have happened this last time, just a couple of months ago, and then just give you that overview. So obviously back to June 2019, and obviously when Ben was our president, really fantastic sort of declaration of climate emergency and biodiversity emergency in June 2019, which then kickstart lots of the policy and guidance work that we're going to present. All the kind of guidance and all the thinking is linked back to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, all 17, as we can see here. But particularly what the RIBA, what we did was split it into two tranches. The first tranche was looking at environmental and social sustainable outcomes or goals, and we can see 10 here, with climate action obviously number 13 being the overall one that everyone links into. The other ones are actually part of a second tranche of work that the RIBA are currently doing, which is on the ethical side of sustainability, which hopefully will come out this year. But what we've done is we've looked at how to distill these into a set of manageable outcomes and metrics that you can manage and measure on a project level. If you've dipped into the UN Sustainable Development Goals, looked behind the 17, you quickly get to 300 metrics, which clearly is too complicated for practical basis and projects. So this is our kind of distillation here. We try to keep the names as far as possible, but we've kind of merged them into, for instance, sustainable water cycle, and some are nested into other terms of climate action. But what it comes down to this is our 8 outcomes. So we start with operational energy use, which is the one everybody's familiar with in terms of kilowatt hours per square meter. Then we've got embodied carbon, which is measured in kilograms CO2. Sustainable water cycle, that metric is wrong. You can see that it's litres per person per day. Sustainable conductivity and transport, which is measured in kilograms CO2 per kilometre. Then we've got sustainable land use and ecology, various metrics there, but the ones that we're maybe settling on is 20% positive net gain to dump biodiversity and our urban greening index of about 0.3 or 0.4. Good health and well-being, which we'll touch on in terms of the metrics. Sustainable communities and social value, which really is picking up amazing amount of traction with our client base. And then we've got sustainable life cycle cost, again, balancing the cost of creating the asset in terms of capital costs and the running cost savings over the whole life of that asset. This is all linked into the 2020 plan of work we see here, and really the main thing here is to sort of focus on the outcome first. And I know that it's really looking at the end use and how the building is going to be, or the asset's going to be used. And then using the operational outcomes as your starting point to define your brief with your client as setting your goals at the beginning. Now, the goals and the outcomes that we talked about, they're just a starting group. There's about 30 metrics which are linked to these 8 sustainable outcomes, but obviously you can work with your client to agree what outcomes are best for them. Then through stages 2 and 3, we're integrating that into strategies, into the emergent design concept, and then through technical design and through manufacturing, obviously we're monitoring, reviewing that, and making sure that that's actually going to be delivered in reality. Stage 6 is where we start to hand over the building, and that's where we measure and learn in that first year's defects period, and obviously that light touch POE at the end of that stage 6 is very important. And then finally, the in-use performance in terms of 7, and all that's linked back into the plan for use, which is fed back into the design process as it's emerging. All those guidance, this is our 4 guides: 2030 challenge, the RIBA Sustainable Outcomes guide, plan of work, which is all embodied that, and then our new guide, which came out beginning of this year, plan for use. So we're going to just focus on the 2030 targets now. And there's 4 outcomes here. We're looking at operational energy, embodied carbon, water use, and then on health and well-being metrics. So first thing to say really is, and I'm sure you've seen this slide before, but Better Building Partnership have done a great analysis of this is commercial office buildings in London primarily, but you can see there that the EPC rating bears no resemblance to in-use performance. The grey bars, our histogram, is actually the actual in-use, actual energy use of buildings. You can see there the D relates almost to 0 up to 700. So something's not working right with our regulatory system. And so what we're proposing really is a more accurate energy modelling, which is taking our Partel model, which is only a fraction of it, and then looking at, this is the CIBSE TM54 estimate, but this is the operational energy emissions of a building, you can see there, which is kind of closer to actual and is closing our performance gap. So we've been working hard in the background, especially Alex and Jess and the RBA. We're working hard to make sure that we don't, we speak with one voice. All the metrics we're giving you is agreed as far as possible with all parts of the construction industry. So we've been working with Letty and the Whole Life Carbon Network to make sure that the operational energy side of things with CIBSE are agreed, and also with the Whole Life Carbon Network, the embodied carbon metrics that you see, the benchmarks are all agreed throughout all the guidance. And just picking up, this whole life carbon will become, probably our main target in the future. But we clearly, at this stage, we need to make sure that we sort of understand the operation and embodied carbon of our buildings, separately, but also together. And we see here, this is our life cycle phases, starting from project stage, right the way to construction, in-use stage, and end-of-life stage. So all that is embodied, whole life carbon, sorry, this is the whole full red box. And then you take away the operational, which is B6 and B7, and that's effectively the other kind of metrics that we're talking about. So just a quick update in terms of these targets. You've seen these before, but this is the updated version. The actual sort of 2025 and 2030 target for operational energy for office buildings hasn't changed, but obviously our base level has changed because the benchmarking work has actually shown that actually a lot of our buildings, new buildings, are actually working quite well. So we can see there the benchmark terms is 130 kilowatt hours per square meter, which is a DEC D. And we can see there that the 2025, 2030 is still the same. So we're still trying to head for that 55 kilowatt hours per square meter. Embodied carbon has changed significantly, and it really is the work has been looking at, unfortunately, the embodied carbon of our typical office buildings is worse than we originally expected. And we see there it's up to 1,400 kilograms CO2 per meter squared. So as a result, we've kept the 50% reduction as our 2030 target. And you can see there it's now 750 instead of 500. Now that's an important kind of change. Obviously, if you are targeting 500, please continue. I think that's showing where we need to be in the future. But actually, this is a kind of more realistic target, I think, for our construction industry at the moment. Potable water use hasn't changed. Then we've expanded the benchmarks with the help of others, including SIBSE, and we see here that we've got a schools target now, and we say there's slightly different business as usual case, 145 kilowatt hours per square metre, which then results in a target of 60 kilowatt hours per square metre, slightly greater than the commercial office in 2030. And then body carbon is 1400 as well, but actually we hope that with current benchmarks, the current best in class, we can achieve 540, so almost our 500 kilograms CO2 per square metre for embodied carbon. And we can see there the potable water use is different, obviously it's per pupil, metre cube. That's the Department of Education preferred metric. And the residential targets has changed slightly as well in terms of the business as usual case, but the targets we can see in terms of operational energy hasn't changed. So it's still that 35 kilowatt hour per square metre is the magic number by 2030. Embodied carbon, again, slightly higher base case there in terms of 1,200. And that's resulted in a higher 2030 target of 625, as opposed to the 300 where we were aiming for in the previous version. Obviously, same thing there. If you can achieve the 300, why not? And go for it. Potable water use hasn't changed. Then above all of those things, in terms of every sector you're working in, then we've got health requirements, and then these are linked with SIBSE and BREEAM type metrics. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel, not trying to create new health metrics, but trying to work with the best available knowledge that we have. So we can see overheating in terms of using the adaptive comfort algorithm. Daylighting in terms of an average daylight factor with a uniformity, again that's SIBSE. There's other ways perhaps better to measure that, but again that's a good starting point. CO2 levels internally, obviously very critical for especially in schools and homes. Total VOC content and formaldehyde. Okay, just moving on to the next slide. There we go. Sorry, just last slide. So this is our kind of new graphic here. So it's just really to kind of highlight how, in terms of large practice, in terms of everybody here, you are the pathfinders. You are kind of leading this kind of charge, and we can see there the current business as usual approach really is that's really unsustainable. We've got to kind of do better, and obviously in terms of large practices joined this is actually how we're going to do this. So and the point there is in 2021. So the design that's on your boards now, that will be completed in 2025. So really what we're kind of advising and hoping that we all aim for is we work to the 2025 targets now. And then similarly, obviously, if you can go further in terms of the 2030 targets, in terms of your client and the cost, capital cost benefits of this, then please go for it. But ultimately, we're always looking ahead in that cycle of 5 years between actually what's on the board and what's completed. And the final slide here, before I hand over to the others, is really just the guide that was created by Jess and Alex, the updated guide, really sort of added more guidance for, as well as architects, but also for clients, and including a template letter, which I think is a fantastic idea. And really is trying to get the clients kind of bought into this idea and signed up, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to allow us to disclose some of this information, and really to make sure that all the kind of project teams are aligned in terms of engineers, that we're all working towards the same target. So that's enough from me, and I'm now going to hand over to Ben Derbyshire at HDA for their interpretation and implementation of the 2030 challenge. Ben, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Gary. And I'm hoping that Elisabetta is going to put our slides up on screen. Yes, thank you very much indeed, Elisabetta. Yes, so thanks to Gary, Jessica, and Alex for involving us in this. And very good to see we have 81 people on the call right now, and climbing. So that's great. So I'm just going to introduce our talk, and Rory Bergin and Elisabetta are going to take over from me. First, a little bit about our practice, HTA Design. We describe ourselves as designers and placemakers in the built environment, making great places to live and a great place to work. That's us eating together, which we do every day, or have done every day on the screen there. And you'll get from that we are housing specialists. And so our contribution really is going to be purely about that. We've got a list of the things that we do as a practice on the slide there, and critically, it includes environmental and sustainability consultancy, where we have a team of engineers, and Rory and Elisabetta are from that team. So that's clearly a significant advantage for us. We have 4 studios across the UK, and actually, although the slide says we have 240 staff, when I put this together, I didn't realise we'd actually risen to 250. So we've broken through the SME barrier, and we wait to find out what bureaucratic challenges that brings with it. So, Elisabetta, next slide, please. I just thought I'd do a little timeline of our involvement in this whole thing. Actually, I thought I'd start before this even, because way back in 2016, I found myself in a meeting chaired by Jeremy Till at Central St Martin's, from which was born the Commission on Ethics and Sustainable Development, which was in fact improved by the council under Jane Duncan's presidency, and reported and was accepted in full during mine. And that's a very important kind of framework, which includes all of the provisions that we're talking about here, as well as the ethical dimensions of practice, which I think is indissoluble from what we're doing here. You'll see that we joined the declarations that were going on at that time of climate emergency in 2019. Speaking to Gary and Alex and others at that time, I was very keen that we should not do so before we had constructed a framework by means of which members of the profession, members of the RIBA, could effectively work together in a benchmarked and consistent way in order to deliver some objective targets. And that was why the Climate Challenge was born. In fact, it was launched shortly after I stepped down as president, but most of the work was done with repeated visits in and out of the president's office during my term. And of course, as soon as I came back into practice, into Civvy Street, as you might say, I approached my partners and we signed up to the Climate Challenge. And we, between October 2019 and March 2020, we were effectively setting up the kind of internal infrastructure to enable us to do it across the entire practice. And you'll be hearing more about that in a moment from Rory and Elisabetta. We didn't, in turn, want to start at the practice until we'd got something in place that would enable everybody on every project in principle, although, as it turns out, it's not that easy to participate in the structure. So we had our first full year of targeting and monitoring our performance on the Climate Challenge between March 2020 and March 2021. And it's the figures based on that that we're going to be sharing with you today. I should say, before I hand over to Rory, that we have not found it particularly easy. There are lots of problems. And I think it's really, really important that we should be doing this kind of thing, which would be sharing experience with one another in order to try to overcome them. And on that basis, we've actually joined with a group we've worked with before of 4 practices, and Rory will be talking about that later, in order to collaborate on ways in which we can break through some of the barriers. So we completely recognise and presumably share with many of you out there on the call that this ain't particularly easy. So I'll hand over on the next slide now to Rory, I presume.
Thank you, Ben. I would just say that yeah, we've embraced the challenge. I think we like the approach. We like the simplicity of the metrics, and we like the fact that it's enabling us to compare projects in a reasonably like-for-like basis across the portfolio of projects, which you'll see shortly. In terms of the long-term goal for us as a practice, of course, is to get feedback from our built work. And while we have, like many other practices, done some examples of post-occupancy evaluation or a building performance evaluation on our projects or social value surveying, it's by no means systemic, and does require quite a lot of effort and work on our part to get engagement with clients or with residents, and of course with the insurance industry, which sort of looks slightly askance at the idea that we might want to check how our buildings are performing after we've completed them and our engagement is finished. So there are challenges ahead. Next slide, please, Elizabeth. So as Ben said, we have a sustainability team within the practice, which provides internal consultancy and provides commonly applied standards and services to projects. So for planning applications for GLA, for daylight sunlight studies, for life cycle assessments, circular economy, and so on. So the kind of work that we do, means that we're able to produce this information fairly easily. But I think it's fair to say that we do have some difficulty getting the same information from other projects where we are not appointed as sustainability consultants. So there is a difference in the data collection and the ease of data collection between the projects where we're kind of responsible and the ones where other people are responsible, and where their scope of engagement doesn't include the climate challenge. But it is also true to say that some of the engineers that we are working with on other projects have, through their own volition, brought up the 2030 climate challenge. So it's not as if we're trying to do something that the rest of the profession is unaware of. So that's reassuring, and I think as time goes by, that gets easier. We also think that the way the criteria changed in version 2 is positive insofar as it's aligned with other organizations, because an issue we've struggled with in the past with sustainability reporting and sustainability standards is where you have multiple standards with slightly different bureaucracies associated with them and slightly different calculation methodologies. So, which just leads to confusion and complexity in a pretty unhelpful sort of way. So I think we support the idea of standardizing the approach and of having the same information in the same data set, which enables comparison between practices and across portfolios. So next, please. So I'm going to leave Elisabetta to describe the data collection and reporting tool, and then I'll come back at the end for some more.
Mm-hmm. So yes, when we decided to embrace the 2030 climate challenge, we thought that was last year that we probably had to create our own tracker, mainly because we didn't have one available yet, but also because we wanted to make sure that we were able to collect data at the right time and asking information to the right people if possible. So we decided to prepare a list of projects where we thought it was important for us to get information or to try and get as much information as possible. But we also structured the report and the tracker in a way that there were 4 different sections so that we could also align with the RIBA plan of work. So we started with the appointment section, and then later down the line we wanted to track information in including planning, construction, and completion. So the appointment section was particularly important because at that time we didn't have a specific letter of appointment, so it was down to the project leader to liaise with clients and with professionals to understand where the aspirations were, and also if it was even possible to target specific performance from the start. We managed to do that in some instances, but almost definitely not for all the projects, obviously. But then as a following point, we also wanted to get more information at the right time for all the projects, and that was probably a planning stage. So when the planning is submitting, then we thought probably that is the time when we could potentially collect quite a bit of information. And in fact, some of them, that information could be extrapolated from energy assessment, energy reports, or sustainability reports more generally. And then in order to keep track of the changes in the project, and we also decided to collect more information later down the line, perhaps at construction, where sometimes the methodology of assessment or even the information changes and the strategy has to be adapted, and there could be changes. Okay, so even if the data is still based on preliminary data and preliminary information, information could be different and actually probably not as good as the initial stages of the design. And then the following stage was the completion, which obviously triggers the post-occupancy evaluation exercise. So we decided to plot the data in a way that was potentially easier for us to understand where the performance, when we could actually understand the performance of the project. And we could see a sort of variety of information and actually a variety of performance depending on the project. So some of the projects were performing incredibly well, potentially achieving the 2030 target already, whilst for some other projects we weren't performing that well. Perhaps we were, performing, worse than expected, and there were very reasons for perhaps getting to that outcome. And overall, however, we managed to get to an average performance, which is basically plotted down here at the end of the graph, an average performance of all the projects. And at the moment, based on the information that we managed to collect for a year or so, we know that we are very close to the 2025 targets, but obviously far away from the 2030 target. We wanted to get information and the breakdown of figure for regulated and unregulated energy, also because there is a different methodology of assessment, and also for us to understand what's coming from regulated energy and what's coming from unregulated one. Next step for us was to have a go and try and summarize the information quickly, so that it is easy to understand, but also potentially easy to communicate with clients, especially when we talk about projects more generally. So we tried and plot the data in an infographic to show the three metrics together and to show the water consumption perhaps first, that sometimes meet the 2025 target, or actually barely meet the 2025 targets. For operational energy, we were able to perform a little bit better, and most of the times we weren't able to get any information about embodied carbon or material, suggesting that we actually need to do some more work in that area. So overall, we managed to track in at least 70 projects, and roughly 10% of the projects were almost completed, and we also managed to collect information from the start almost to the end. We haven't got any information in terms of post-occupancy evaluation, if you like, mostly because we haven't even started that process yet, or we have started that process, but we are not at the end of the first year. But then for two-thirds of the project, we managed to get some form of information, perhaps a planning stage, but perhaps not in the later stages of the design. But for almost a quarter of them, we didn't get any data at all, suggesting that there were some challenges in addition to the challenge itself. So it's about collecting information, getting information, perhaps not being able to be in touch with people, or even if we were, perhaps we didn't manage to get any relevant information back. The other point is that we managed to get information, as I said, in terms of operational energy, but most of the times we didn't really manage to get the embodied carbon figures. So we only managed to obtain information from only 6 projects in fact. And then for post-occupancy evaluation, which is a crucial part for us, we managed to identify at least 16 projects from the list where we think we can comfortably undertake a post-occupancy evaluation exercise. And we started the discussion with clients already, and we are pretty confident that we will be able to get some information when it comes to the right time, of course. And finally, we are also working with universities and some clients to develop research specifically on post-occupancy, but also on embodied carbon in these areas to develop, our knowledge with regards to the three metrics in particular, because we know that it isn't always possible to get much information about average performance of project in specific areas, at least, for example, in off-site construction. So we are developing something together with universities. As I said, we have partnership with universities and our clients as well, working together with our clients to define and to develop a few areas that we know are still a bit challenging.
Elisabetta, it's Gary here. I've just given you a couple of minutes warning if we could wrap up soon. Okay, thanks.
I think we're just at the conclusion. I think really this is one of the two final slides.
Yeah, so just to say that it's important that when you're having the discussions about the climate challenge, about who you have the discussion with, and there is an issue where you have people who are working, people working on a particular project who might be very project management focused, and they see this as an additional complexity, whereas it's probably best to approach the clients from a higher layer of decision making, to discuss this as part of their strategic purpose and their strategic goals, rather than leaving it to project teams. There is a learning curve for everybody involved, so it's important to bring it up earlier on in the project discussions and not leave it till later on. Some of the available methodologies are not that recognized yet. So unregulated energy calculations, for example, seem to vary from project to project depending on the people carrying out and the methodologies. Embodied carbon is a changing, growing science, and there's quite a lot of misinformation out there actually on it. So people who've done a small piece of work, are willing to talk about their sort of knowledge, but it's a growing, changing field, and I think we should all be open to learning in it. There are issues around insurance because, as I said, insurers are not that keen on us getting involved with buildings post the point when we've been appointed, and of course not all of our clients are interested. Although I think that has changed significantly actually during the pandemic, and coming out of the pandemic, we certainly see an increase of requirements for various versions of zero carbon. Whether it's whole life zero carbon, net zero carbon, or whatever it is that they think they mean when they say zero carbon. So there's quite a lot of work to be done in clarification actually of demands. Is that the last slide, Elisabetta? Yeah, as Ben said at the beginning, as part of this activity, we are collaborating with 4 other housing architects on the POE particularly, because that's an area where a lot of work has been done on building performance evaluation, but not enough work has been done on getting the processes right to enable architects to engage at the right point and in the right way. So this is something we're hoping to solve, or at least set out the issues that need to be solved to enable POE to happen more routinely. So that's all from us.
Great, and thank you very much to the HDA team. And I think the main thing here is about sharing information. I think that came through in your talks there. It's about, we've got to make sure that we press. The challenge is bigger than all of us, so we've got to share that knowledge, that information. That's really what we're on about here. Right, next presentation, we can hand over to Louisa at Hawkins Brown. And so fantastic work you're doing at Hawkins Brown there, Lisa. So really excited to see what's happening.
Thank you, and thanks very much for that talk as well. It was really fascinating, and I was hoping to learn some things myself today, and I definitely have. Hopefully that screen has come through now. So a very quick intro about me. I'm a partner and sustainability lead at Hawkins Brown. But I think what's important about the structure we now have in the practice is that the sustainability team are embedded into what we've constructed called a specialist design studio, which I also head up. And so the sustainability group is part of a wider group of expertise, including digital design, BIM, visualization, technical. And the power of sustainability sitting within this group is the ability to spread the knowledge further, approach and look at milestone checkpoints, similar to how HTA were talking around, among a greater number of people. And so we have more impact collectively. I was going to talk about opportunities, challenges and solutions today. So more around the hearts and minds aspect, I suppose, of bringing everyone with you and going in the same direction, because each practice will have to approach that differently depending on the inherent culture. So a little bit about Hawkins Brown. We're a practice of 300 people now, spread across 4 different offices, London, Manchester, Edinburgh and LA. And we undertake a wide range of projects at all sectors, all scales, including urban design and interiors. So the way that we approached embedding the RIBA 2030 challenge into our practice had to be flexible enough that it responds to that really diverse portfolio. So some of the opportunities first, start with the positive. So during 2019, when the climate emergency rose to prominence in the media, we had architects declare and we had the RIBA 2030 challenge. Hawkins Brown decided to embrace this move and revisit the whole sustainability strategy and how it worked. So we took a whole exercise of discussing at all levels of the practice. It had to be collective, it had to be partner led, but we had to get commitment from all members of the office. So we had a green week and it culminated in the presentation of a large staff survey to reach consensus on what we needed to do and basically get buy-in. It wasn't just the job of me and the team to solve this, the fact that we all had a role. And the fact that we considered it was really important that the RIBA 2030 challenge was one of those tools and that we needed to do it properly. So it wasn't just talk, it was actually properly embedded. So it culminated in the investment of staff, extra staff, our whole life carbon tool, and then relevant processes to target and report against the metrics. So the extensive complicated discussions were filtered down into a simple concept really, actually. And the idea was it was flexible enough to apply to all of our sectors and scales and pretty easy for people with little specific training to explain and relate their project back to these key ideas. So reducing carbon, improving society. And then within that, we have an exercise that we do at Project Startup where we actually allocate what metrics we're targeting within those categories for each individual project. And so it's really an evidence-based design approach to ensure that our buildings do enhance the lives of the future generations. So onto a bit more of the dry stuff. Now we had a bit more capacity in the team. We spent time updating resources and our support networks across the office. So we have a stage-by-stage project plan, which sets out what we do at each stage, what we report on, what we would like our consultants to be doing. So it's an internal facing document and an external one. So we can send it out to clients and consultants and say, well, actually, because this is a collaborative effort, you know, from you, to do this, we need X, Y, Z. We've got documentation showing RIBA 20 challenge metrics and pointers on how to get there, standard templates, you know, mentioned POE today as well, POE questions and templates, design review records that are linked to the project plan that we catch up on interim reviews, a more organized pattern of startup and interim reviews and then post-completion. The initiation of a centralized data storage solution, and then, of course, to complement all of this, the upgrade of our carbon measuring tool, HBERT, which is one of the key metrics that the RIBA 2030 looks at. And because of the media, because clients were asking us to meet LETI targets, to meet RIBA targets, because of loads of discussions in-house, we found, and because we were better set up to give advice, it really helped complement what people from the practice were asking us to do. So clients were asking for it more, and some of it was actually just articulating, helping the teams articulate the strategies they'd already embedded more properly. So you'd have someone saying, well, my project isn't sustainable, and you'd go in and you'd say, well, you're doing this, this, and this. If you just did this a bit better, actually the approach is fundamentally right. So some of it was about building confidence, and some of it was about building language and approaches and just being a lot more deliberate, and then challenging other members of the team. And it's grown, so more and more people are coming voluntarily now to the team, asking for advice, asking us to be involved early stage, rather than when we started phoning round and trying to encourage people to make best practice. And in some ways, lockdown and the transfer to digital video communication has been pretty revolutionary, actually, for us, because we're spread across so many offices. Actually, we've been able to embed the approach a bit more, a lot more uniformly across all of that. So having gone through a few of the opportunities, some challenges, it can be really hard to get 300 people to pull in the same direction and send out the same message. We have such a wide range of projects, and a lot of them have different drivers, briefs, clients, some of them with and without environmental response at the forefront. And sometimes the functional requirements can be, almost in conflict with, your natural environmental design response. However, it's really important, I think, to remember every project can respond. And even in an energy hungry research building, for example, there are some really key moves you can make early on. Sensible organisation of the brief, spatial efficiencies, interrogation of what the client needs, what do they mean by flexibility, and then, of course, embedding good monitoring and optimisation support as part of the post-completion delivery model. So there's things that we can do on every project, and we should be doing. And it takes more than a small team of people really in the office to ensure each project starts with the right aspirations and then follows them through. So many projects we see are really ambitious at the outset, but then difficult decisions have to be made in order to deliver them. So if the environmental design is not embedded and is not sort of bought in, if you like, with the client and the consultants, then it's always going to be at risk. So that's a key thing we concentrate on early doors. Another thorny issue we tackle at Hawkins Brown is complexity. So sustainability, or developing a sustainable approach for each client, for each site, for each context, is complicated. And we're often asked to summarize what can be really complex concepts or lengthy pieces of work into digestible form for architectural teams, clients, and consultees. So can you just send me one slide that I can use for my presentation to explain the whole strategy? When you feel that probably you need to do 20 or so to justify the amount of thought. So but through bitter experience, we've learned that when you get the one slide right, it can have a really far-reaching effect on the type of decision that's made. So a lot of time goes into thinking around those narratives and those, what is the decision that we're trying to get someone to make. It was really good actually to see what was just presented earlier. It can be a massive challenge collecting the data on projects to track performance and actually measure whether you're doing things right or not. So we've recently moved from manually collecting data each year on a spreadsheet to a centralized data storage system. But this still relies on the human element of taking time to fill out the forms, to give the information at the right time, to ask the engineers for it, to understand what it is you're asking for, to report it in the right way. So a lot of time is going in at the moment to try and go through all of that with people, and hopefully the more time we keep repeating it, the more success we'll have. So a few solutions just to summarize. If there were more, we'd probably all be doing it brilliantly already, but I'm hoping to learn a bit myself today as well. So at Hawkins Brown, I just thought I'd repeat this diagram because we found massive success at just keeping it really simple for people and concentrating on a few elements of the design rather than long checklists has definitely enabled us to get the message across to a larger range of people and more quickly. And I'd like to think the majority of the office can now effectively use this diagram to frame their strategies around it. And I guess this leads on to authenticity and the message. So as committed as our team are, they can't be everywhere all the time. So it takes a lot of reinforcement. Sometimes you feel you're repeating information quite a lot. But I think I'm told people need it and appreciate it. And also, of course, we have a lot of people starting often. They need to buy in and understand the collective approach as well. So we take time to make sure the message we're sharing internally is the same as possible as the message going externally to events like this, or, you know, of course, our clients and our collaborators. And then, of course, we can't do this without empowering people. So as a team, we think it's hugely important to engage externally. So we do a lot of outreach and learning ourselves and bringing this back to the practice. But also for us, the 2030 challenge has added the weight of authenticity, if you like, to the need, and then overlaid the quantitative metrics that everyone, no matter their knowledge, can start to use and start the conversation with their clients and say, have you seen this? This is what we need to be doing. And our view is the key solution is to upskill everyone really and allow them to feel powerful enough to take the responsibility. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Sorry, you caught me off guard there. Really clear sort of messages there, and I think it kind of highlights the it's this thing where it's like the 2030 challenge. We try to keep it as simple as possible. These kind of sort of key metrics and then proxies for other things, because otherwise, if you start that long list of trying to collect loads of data, then I think everybody gets a little bit tired, including obviously all us as well. So these are really clear diagrams there and very clear advice to our kind of colleagues. Right, so we're on to our last speaker, and it's Philip from BDP, and just to share some of your great work and obviously what you're planning to do in the 2030 challenge. Over to you, Philip.
Thank you. Let's see if I can make this work properly. One moment. Great. So hello, and thank you for being given the opportunity to speak. So it's really interesting to hear others talk. I think we're all sort of doing the same thing in slightly different ways, and I think the issues and challenges we're facing are all very similar. So I'm going to talk through this, talk through these slides through our lens, through BDP's lens, what we've been trying to put in place to enable us to deliver to a range of commitments that we've made as an organisation. So before I get going, just as a bit of context, we're a big thing. We've got 10 studios in the UK, though some of them are workspaces in shared offices, but a large presence in the UK, a substantial presence in North America and then Middle East and Asia as well, which in itself presents challenges. I think, as Louise has already talked to, trying to get everybody to pull in a coherent direction is difficult. We employ about 1,400 people globally, and there are about 1,100 or so in the UK. As a potted history, I mean, we've been trying to do sustainable things, environmental things for a long time. It has been core to our ethos as an organisation. You know, founded 60 years ago. As an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary design practice, we've tried to do all of these things that we're talking about today across all of our professions, you know, and the value put in having everybody under one roof should, in theory, make some of this stuff easier, though it doesn't in all cases. In 2001, my team, not that I've been around at BDP for that long, but in 2001, we founded our sustainability profession, and we've been doing good things since. There have obviously been ebbs and flows in our size and scale, but we do sit, you know, as a fulcrum in the business, really providing that consultancy, consultancy activity. And then, you know, in recent years, we've made a series of commitments there that are in the top right. So I guess just to a bit more context. Why are we doing what we're doing? So we've made a load of commitments. You know, I think everybody sort of felt the wave of need to sign up to all of these initiatives that have come forward. And from our perspective, the first really that crossed our bow was the Declare movement. All of our services, all of our professions have signed up to that could. And when we were interrogating what that meant, you know, it's driving us in a good direction. It's getting the industry to do good things, but actually, it didn't mean much to us when we looked through it. I think we were not so much critical of it, but questioning. And it's like, well, okay, we understand where it's going, where it's driving us to, but what does that mean? What do we need to do to substantiate some of these bullet points, these commitments? So across that range of 11 commitments, we in essence distilled it down to advocacy, knowledge sharing, and demonstrating best practice, setting performance standards, which is exactly why we're here, minimizing resource consumption, and evaluating impact. And so that's really been the sort of core of what we've been driving towards over the last couple of years. And we've transposed that into 3 and 4, 3.5 buckets, a package of tools, measures, initiatives, whatever, to support our projects, the need to support our staff, to enable them to make better choices, to enable them to grow and improve their literacy across these sorts of things, and then supporting our places. So we've got, as I say, we've got 10 locations in the UK, a number across the globe, and actually we need to practice what we preach. We can't sit in front of a client and say, this is what you should be doing, when we're not doing it ourselves. And then across all of those is how we support and report on those performance aspects. And of course, there's investment required across all of these. So this is just an example of some of the good work we're doing from our international studios. This is our Rotterdam studio. So this is a concept for a school in The Hague, Montessori school, looking at reusing ground floor and foundations, looking at timber structure, all that sort of good stuff that we say as an organisation, if only BDP knew what BDP knows, because there are so many of us and there are so many people working in their little pockets that we're working really hard just to leverage that out of ourselves, let alone or before we start to, I suppose, really meaningfully engage with the wider stakeholder group like you guys. So working hard there. So anyway, so that declare movement transposed itself into this policy that we signed, or our chief executive signed, as we all got locked down in March or April 2019. It's really the 5 commitments on the left that we're making movements towards. So science-based targets for our operations, communicating our ambitions through our studios. As far as the sort of conversation here goes, it's about these minimum environmental performance standards. We're specifically focused on healthy materials, embodied carbon, operational carbon, and biodiversity, which I think talks very nicely to the RIBA Climate Challenge. Demonstrating the consideration of life cycle and whole life impacts across all of our design work, and getting a slightly more robust framework in place for deciding whether or not to bid for projects, noting their potential purpose or indeed the client organisation. So that's what's framed what we're up to, and how are we doing that? So I think this is where we sort of get into the realms of the stuff that the others have talked about. So we're working alongside Letty and others, UKGBC and others, to develop a series of design templates that can help my colleagues do better. We have a healthy materials framework that we're implementing, which is really about ensuring the risk to building users is minimised, but also the off-gassing and those harmful aspects that materials can contribute. We're fortunate enough to have ISO 9 and 14001 in place already, and we're using that really as, I suppose, the stick to hit the business through our LRQA auditors. To improve the processes around how we embed performance in our design work, and how we extract performance from our design work. So in amongst that, we've set new specific requirements for activities at each design stage. We have the minimum performance standards embedded. We have performance reporting mandated. So we've got some new processes in place to help us extract that information, and we're mandating the need to undertake post-occupancy evaluation. Now, I guess with all of that, to use the sort of industry term, there will be derogations. There'll be instances where we can't do it, but if we set the bar high, we might come somewhere close. Social value, we've talked about, a few people have talked about, which we're trying to embed that, and then to sort of emphasise the point around, if only we knew what we know. We've in the last year set up BDP Lab, which is I suppose a panel of people from across the business that can, light's just gone off, that can help to extract that information from their silos. Again, just learning from projects. This is our gap house. So again, we have these opportunities. We're investing in research. We're using these prototype projects to sort of glean this understanding, and we're trialing these toolkits that are emerging. Like, what does Letty mean in this context, for example? So we're really, we're hopeful that this will benefit both this project and our business. We can't do any of that stuff unless people are capable of doing it. So we are investing in a load of, I suppose, personnel development initiatives. But again, we don't know what the current skill set is. So a big piece of that is a skills audit, which we're due to launch in the coming months. We're looking at investing in minimum training and upskilling type quotas. And then, investment in personal and professional development inside and outside of work. I think it's really important not to drill in the importance of I suppose the commercial entity in which they reside, but actually if you can enable people to make better choices, as I say, outside of work, then they'll hopefully bring that enthusiasm back in. Again, much like Hawkins Brown, we ran a climate action week a year or two ago. And we're aiming to run that annually, where we're sort of inspiring and facilitating workshops to leverage and glean ideas and suggestions out of our colleagues. In regard to our places, so I won't dwell on this, but again, we've got to ensure that the studios we reside in meet the high standards we're setting ourselves from a sort of commercial output perspective. And a big part of that is ensuring that they perform efficiently, but also, who we buy from and what we buy is really important when we're starting to consider that science-based target and our need to evaluate our supply chain impacts, our Scope 3 emissions. And again, we've been running building user surveys across our studios to try and get that feedback, but also understand where we can do things better and improve performance. So all of that sort of manifests itself into where we are, or sorry, why we're all here today, which is how do we get this information out of our business? How do we share it with industry? How do we all learn to do things better? We're working through that, and we've made some really sort of I suppose notable moves in recent months. We've got a job to do to align our activity with the SDGs. Obviously, contributing to this climate challenge piece supports that. And ultimately, we want to get to a point where we can start to fully report in an ESG sense, to coin the sort of financial sector term. We have been reporting on our environmental impact as an organisation for a number of years. The intent is to expand that to cover and report on some of the metrics that we're committing ourselves to from a project perspective as well. Penultimate slide. So longer term aims. It is about this evidence base. So I'm impressed to see HTA collecting data. We have collected data for a long time, but it's very patchy and not very useful. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. We want to ensure that all of our staff have capability. We want to expand our minimum performance standards to cover new things. We want to get all of our projects and studios to net zero operation. We want to get all of our projects towards net zero capital. We want zero carbon supply chain. We want to, as I say, expand that public reporting, and we want to fundamentally grow the scope of our control and process to cover our global activities, because this is not just a UK problem. So lastly, just to conclude on where we see some of the challenges and opportunities. So as I say, we've been collecting data for a long time, but it's not audited from a is it right or wrong perspective, and the definitions that we use across those. And we've already talked about it. What units are we using? What do we mean when we're talking about embodied carbon? What modules are we referring to? So getting consistency across that is important for us, but it's also important for the industry, and people are making progress in that respect. From a process perspective, as Hawkins Brown said, we do a huge range of projects, scale and size. So how do we get that consistency? Where there's multi-million pounds worth of fees on projects, it's perhaps easier to spend a bit of time and effort in getting that data. On a few £1,000s landscape architectural commission, what do we have the capacity to get that data, and is it as useful? So there's questions there that we're still ironing out, or issues we're still ironing out. I think a big opportunity is getting, we've had conversations with MBS, for example, about how we can standardise prelims and specifications to ensure that contractors are signing up to deliver the same stuff consistently, and the same stuff is being bought consistently. With that, when we're talking about post-occupancy evaluation as an example, I think there's a real opportunity there to build that standardised request, such that the same data starts to trickle out of all of these projects. Capacity and ability of contractors, I think that's a long-standing issue. We're all aware of it. We can design things well, but the cost men still turn up and start to carve things out. So how do we overcome that? Not sure yet. The learning piece I talked about, bottom up versus top down, I think is a really important aspect to consider. We've been fortunate in that we've got chief executive buy-in, but it's now sort of my job to embed that and deliver it from the bottom up of the business, which is challenging when we've got such a far reach and large staff pool. And then I suppose wrapped up in all of that is the need to move from cost to value. So we historically have talked about how much things cost, whereas actually it might cost you a few more £1,000s to do that bit of post-occupancy evaluation, but the value that delivers is I think far more important than the pound signs. So it's about, again, back to Louisa's, I suppose, message of simplicity, articulating that so these end users can understand why we're trying to do what we're trying to do. That is it.
Great. Okay, thanks very much, Philip. That's fantastic. Very clear structure in terms of the way you've gone about your 2030 challenge there, and really answers some of the questions in the chat box as well, in terms of how one would go about creating a process within your company. So we'll come back onto that in a minute. So really, we've got 25 minutes for Q&A. This is your Q&A. So if you just start getting on the chat box there. Alex Tate, if you just let you know that my computer's running a bit slow. So if you see any questions that you're really kind of key on, and obviously the other panelists as well, please shout out. But we're going to start with just structure a little bit of her presentation, which I thought was very good, is actually just touch on the moment just at the beginning in terms of the opportunities. So, and then before we move into the barriers and the challenges, because there's going to be lots of these, and we've touched upon, I think everybody's touched upon many of these. And then what we'll do is we'll wrap up at the end in terms of just going around each practice in terms of how they see the way forward for the practice in terms of solutions and where the next steps are. So first off, I'm just going to ask each practice just to kind of touch base on terms of how you see the opportunities of the 2030 challenge, and then really how would you present that and sell that to clients, because ultimately this is obviously part of that kind of barrier as well. So if I can start off with HTA there in terms of Ben and the team, if you want to pick up that question.
Yes, well, funnily enough, we're just embarking on our own internal medium-term business planning, which we've labelled HTA 2030. And actually, absolutely at the heart of it is going to be a systemic approach to achieving not just environmental, but also social sustainability. And I've put on the chat box that we're just as interested in aligning approaches, measures, and techniques for measuring social value as we are in these questions that we're talking about today. So two things really. One is, I think it's completely fundamental to business planning for a successful practice in the next decade to have mastery of this issue and to be able to communicate that very convincingly to our clients. But equally well, to echo Rory's remarks, we think that the kind of horizontal consistency across the industry, across our co-consultants and amongst our clients is also crucial. So one of the reasons we are collaborating with our colleagues in the group we call For Housing Architects, and we're also seeking to approach organizations like the National Federation of Housing Associations and any organizations with any kind of longitudinal commitment to the performance of the buildings that they have developed in order to develop this understanding. So we're keen to work with UK GBC and so on with that objective. So I think it's pretty central, frankly, and I'm great to see so many people today. And I think the more we are able to create a consistent approach, the more we will achieve the overall objective of climate challenge, but also prosper as businesses.
Great, thanks, Ben. Louisa, just picking up that question then. So have you seen in terms of your clients, are they picking up on the 2030 challenge as well? And really in a way it's kind of mirroring what we're doing here, or do you think there's a bit more work that we need to do to, sort of upskill our clients really?
I don't think it's a problem with awareness anymore, actually. I think all the clients we talk to are aware of LETI, are aware of RIBA, come to us with those targets embedded into their briefs. I think the next step is actually to develop an understanding of what it takes to actually deliver on those targets, because I think that talks to one of my challenges about the watering down through the process. So I think a lot of people have the high ambitions now, and they're willing to talk about the issues at the beginning, but when you explain the number of design iterations you might have to go through to test whether you're actually meeting them at design stage instead of just stating the target and then hoping for the best at the end, the number of design iterations, the extensive energy modeling, the iterative embodied carbon tracking, on some projects where we've done it the best, we've had an engaged client at the beginning, and we've instituted a program of, say, carbon workshops, 3 or 4 over a stage 2 into a stage 3 period, so that you can embed the approaches and the material choices and explain to them at each step why you're doing what you're doing. Those are the ones that have been most successful, but it takes that amount of time and engagement to do it. And that's, I think, where the next level of upskilling and education needs to come in. It's the client's understanding the extent of design and thinking work that is embedded.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Very, very good points there. Philip, in terms of your, I suppose your awareness and appreciation of clients and then the opportunities that the 2030 challenge brings, I mean, what's your feeling on clients are on this?
Yeah, I much like Louisa, I think we're still finding that you've got clients at either end of the scale, either end of the spectrum. You've got some that are up for it and some that are trying to just get through the hoops as closely as they can. I think we're using the climate challenge targets as a mechanism to, I suppose, articulate what good looks like, which I think is very important in setting that initial ambition. When I talked a bit about how the processes we're putting in place to sort of almost standardize our briefing. So if there isn't a sustainability brief, we issue one to the client and say this is what it should be, and that absolutely includes these targets. They're exceptionally useful in that respect. There is still the issue, though, of, I suppose, back to my cost versus value. It is still more expensive, I would argue, at the moment, because we as an industry don't know what the right answer is yet. There isn't one approach. There are still lots of approaches, and I think as we do this more, we will start to hone in on what the best solutions are, and the cost certainty around those will be far more robust. So the clients understand what it is they're buying. That, I suppose, is part of how we're trying to frame that activity around whole life impacts. Let's at least paint the picture. What could it be if money were no object, if site constraints were no object? What could it be? And then at least the client knows what those two bookends are, and hopefully we land somewhere in the middle. But the targets are really useful in framing and benchmarking that activity.
Great, thanks, Phil. Just in terms of my own practice, I'm at HOK now. It's our international firm in sort of 23 locations, and I think it's just bringing this in to a wider picture in terms of the AIA 2030 commitment. Obviously, we did actually speak with them, and they very sort of worked with them in terms of the 2030 challenge as well. And really, what it states for me, it's really exciting times where it's really this kind of sort of language of 2030 challenge throughout the world is really kind of coalescing. It really is the focus for lots of kind of designers. And then really from a HOK perspective, what this kind of does, and obviously Ben is there as well in terms of chairman of HDA, but our kind of CEO at HOK is exactly the same. He said, right, this is it, this is our goal, and that is percolated right the way through all parts of the business, and that really sets everybody up in terms of all the studios and everything. So it puts it on the agenda. Then picking up Louisa's point really is how do we then deliver that? And that really is the kind of nuts and bolts of this kind of presentation. So we'll get onto that barriers and the challenges of that in a minute. But then picking up Sir Philip's your point, really I think that the clients are there. I think they are aware. In terms of, I'm just thinking about through the last few bids that I've done this last 6 months, I would say the majority have the 2030 challenge in there, which is extraordinary. I'm so pleased when that's the thing. So I would say to everybody on the kind of call here is that our clients are now aware of this. They're really asking us, they're challenging us now to deliver. And really, this is it. This is it. We've got to get on and do it, really. So anyway, right. So that's kind of the kind of basic opportunities of what we're trying to do there. And we know that the clients are with us, or some of us are challenging us. Then obviously we talk about challenges in a more positive way, but really it is some of these are barriers and some of these are very difficult to get through. I'm going to pick up one of the chat box questions at the beginning. So I'm going to start at the end of the process in terms of the supply chain, because we're trying to hit these metrics from our sort of modeling and prediction phase, but really is the supply chain there? So I would say, really bringing in this discussion of challenges, what are the kind of main challenges you find in your practice, but really picking up the supply chain side. So I'm going to start off with Ben as well again. So in terms of supply chain, so you set all these targets at the beginning, and how does that translate through to the people who are constructing our buildings? Ben, you're on mute.
Sorry, I think I should give Rory a go at answering that.
Okay, Rory, on you go, Rory.
Get a bit of a mix.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is a very varied one. So there are parts of the supply chain that are very professional, very well set up. As you'll probably be aware, we're doing a lot of work in prefabrication, and the sort of the application of factories and manufacturing and those kinds of repetitive processes to all of this is very positive, and is demonstrating very good results, both in sort of in calculation and in terms of outcomes. But that's a relatively small part of the construction sector, which is generally fragmented, divisive, argumentative, etc. So I suppose our feeling as a practice is that we will naturally gravitate more towards the supply chain and clients and project typologies that lend themselves towards success, and market willing and enabling us, hopefully, to move away from the projects where they're set up not to deliver the outcomes we're looking for. So it's also about us making choices as a practice about where we're going to spend our time and energy, because we all know it's limited.
And Rory, just picking up that in terms of the environmental product declarations, how have you found that within the domestic sector?
I would say it's not having much of an impact, because BREEAM is the tool that's dragging EPDs into the commercial sector. So it hasn't had much impact yet on the domestic sector. I think what's happening more is that the individual manufacturers of large scale prefabrication are recognizing the benefits of both of them understanding the supply chain that they have, the embodied carbon of that supply chain, and using their pretty large scale businesses to drive the supply chain down for themselves and therefore for us. So not all of this is a problem for us as designers to solve. Quite a lot of it is in the manufacturing and in the supply chain, but it's really helpful for us to have the same consistent message to them, whether it's through EPDs or through the Carbon Challenge, that this is what we're looking for, and we will choose A over B if it's got a lower carbon footprint, or if it's going to give us better outcomes in terms of health, finish, quality, etc. So it's adding that into the mix consistently.
Great. Yeah, great, Rory. And Louisa, this is picking up. I've obviously chaired a few of these events over the lockdown, and interestingly, it was quite a few with the NBS and supply chain, and really, I'm at that point that Rory was picking up on, in terms of, listen, guys, this is what's coming. This is what we're designing to. We're going to aim for the challenge. You've got to be ready for us to deliver it. How have you found your supply chain? And obviously, Hawkins Brown, you work quite across a lot of sectors. So, is there any particular sectors that are doing better than others, perhaps?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. In terms of people that we work with, I think it probably still is quite varied. I mean, we're very reliant. I think it comes down to scope. Again, I don't want to sort of over-egg it, but I think what we found the problem to be is when the scopes are misaligned. And because as architects, more often than not, lead consultant, lead designer, but in order to deliver on a lot of this challenge, it's completely collaborative. And we spend a lot of time talking, early doors. If our sustainability team isn't able to be in direct contact with the client for whatever reason, because we can't cover all the projects, but upskilling our teams to understand the importance of getting the scope right, so that when you get to sort of stage 3, stage 4, you can actually track, whether you're measuring success or not. And more often than not, you find where there are problems that the scope has been watered down, and certain consultants aren't willing to do certain activities because they're not being paid to do them, which is entirely justified because it wasn't set up right in the first place. So yeah, from my experience, I think getting the scope right early doors to match the scope to actually the metrics you want to track and the performance you want to deliver is really, really quite key, because then everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, okay, Lisa, that's a really, really good point. So it's almost like what you're indicating really is if you get that right or understood at the beginning, all parties, then the supply chain will actually sort of react. Because that's it, they've got to achieve that. And if it's written
because they're
into,
being paid to do so, and maybe there's a contractual element in terms of doing so, and leading from there. I suppose the only other minor point is that you see a difference between owner occupiers and more speculative clients. There is a difference in the way they approach how they set their projects up.
Great. Okay, thanks, Lisa. Okay, Philip, on to you in terms of that construction side of our kind of activities. What kind of barriers have you found to achieving the 2030 climate challenge?
I mean, practically speaking, at the moment, it's I think across a whole range of things, it's availability of materials. I think there seems to be shortages everywhere you look, and I don't know if that's a Brexit or a Suez Canal blockage or whatever it is, but there seems to be trouble in even getting steel, let alone timber and things. So I mean, there's that side of, I guess, just availability. I still think that there are lots of major contractors who don't have the expertise, the capability, and in most instances the experience. I mean, we were very fortunate on our enterprise centre at the UEA to have a contractors A team. That was going to be their showpiece project, so they threw everything at it and they delivered it. They'd never done a passive house building before, and they nailed it. But when you don't get the A team from these big contractors, that things can slip and shortcuts can be made. So I think, again, I suppose it's how do you track that through that delivery process? Is it back to Louisa's point about the contractual setup, pay and gain share kind of stuff? I mean, I don't know if I'm giving you an answer to your question, but I think there are still a number of barriers to overcome. We're trying our best to get these. I mean, it's pretty dull, but it sort of does all boil back down to process, and how you can make sure that you're tracking decisions, VE or design development, whatever you want to call it, and the impact of that. And then fundamentally, obviously there is a huge climate and biodiversity emergency that the globe needs to respond to. But the reason we build buildings, design and build buildings is to provide a function for people, isn't it? So it's finding that balance between delivering a functional brief, meeting a functional brief, providing a comfortable and effective facility, yet almost advocating that you don't build it. So how do you marry all of those competing factors? I don't know, but anyway, but from a contractor perspective, I think there's still it's really about that capability and ability, I think.
Okay, I think Philip, I think that you've raised the enterprise centre, and so I know that well. I've travel around it, so I think it's really one of the most fantastic buildings, and it really, I think in terms of its benchmarks, it hits the 23rd turn challenge as well in practice. And I think that with actually Alex and the RIBA and Jess, I think this is the next stage where it really is a deep dive into case studies to show how it's actually been achieved, and that will help us all in terms of that. And knowing Stuart Thompson, who was your construction manager on that building, he was with us on Soft Landings user group, so he was completely on message. And I think this is the thing which is tying up all these links, is we've got to educate, upskill their supply chain to the same level as us, and then if we're all speaking with the same understanding, that really kind of helps. So really that's construction side. So I'm going to move into the design team now in terms of challenges we have with our kind of colleagues, and this is more, I'm going to end on, Lisa, I'm going to end on the terms of actually the terms of our own practices and how we actually achieve that in terms of team. So I'm thinking more wider in terms of the project team in itself. So really just thinking about sort of challenges of particularly, I think it's to be fair to our engineering colleagues, they're fantastic in general, but sometimes it's quite difficult to get the data out of them. So Ben, I don't know if maybe if you want to.
Yeah, I'm going to finger Elisabetta for this one, because she is the person really from the sustainability team at HTA who engages with the project team. So she's the one to tell you the ups and downs of that story.
Okay, Elisabetta.
There are definitely some opportunities, but also some challenges, I would say. Obviously, working in a practice where there are different teams with different specialisms definitely helps. So everything that is internal definitely help that communication quite easily. The challenge perhaps is when we have to engage with people that perhaps are external, but obviously not that keen to collaborate, which happens unfortunately. In other instances, actually, we have that level of communication and quite good collaboration with external people as well. But the key point would be to be clear from the start. I think as Lisa said, that we have to be clear about the scope from the very beginning with the client, but also with the wider team. In that case, we obviously have that kind of collaboration. Internally, the more collaboration we create, the better. And again, that starts from the very beginning. If someone starts developing something and then in parallel we do, for example, a technical analysis, we found that doesn't really work. So it is a sort of iterative process and a continuous development, and it's also a learning process for all of us, really.
Okay, and Elisabetta, in terms of your the design team or engineers that provide the data more effectively and more accurately, is there any sort of things you do that maybe help that, just in terms of giving advice to others? A 3-line whip perhaps with the client, and with obviously getting Ben to maybe jump in there if they're not being collaborative enough?
I think the first thing that we need to clarify is the metric, effectively, because there are several definitions. So the London plan asks to do something, and the calculation tells a story, and then effectively there are other metrics as well. So first of all, we need to be clear what zero carbon means, for example, because it's not necessarily clear, but also making sure that we simplify the technical elements as well. In other words, there is a world of technical consultancy and analysis and things like that, which is not necessarily relevant to the key message that we need to express to clients, but also to the wider design team. So it's about simplifying the process and also getting the key message across, which I think is quite key.
Okay, that's great, thanks. Louisa, just moving on to you in terms of your design team, maybe other parts of the project team. What kind of major challenges have you came across within gathering the data?
I think they're all quite similar actually to what Elisabetta outlined. So I wondered, instead of repeating, I might just turn it round and say actually one of the solutions that we found to this is identifying a member of our own internal team, and then ideally the wider team, but a sustainability champion, if you like. And it's not their only role, it's just that it's the contact in the team who knows the design, who hopefully has enough authority to talk to the client and the other consultants, and is in a coordination sort of position to take responsibility for understanding the metrics on that particular project, being the go-between, if you like, between our sustainability and our wider specialist design studio and the project team, and we found that to be a bit more of an effective solution to some of these challenges.
That's great. No, thanks very much, Lisa. And yeah, we've got to make it positive. It's not about barriers and challenges. We can do this. We can. Philip, how do you do about it, and what solutions do you bring?
Yeah, so I guess this is part of a fairly substantial process overhaul that we're, again, back to process, that we're embedding at the moment. So, similar to Louisa, we've got a network of about 80 sustainability champions across the business in all of our studios, who are either people with a bit of qualification or just an interest. And that network, we're making use of the Teams platform to share and collaborate, and articles, conferences, those sorts of things. But also the intention is that they then, sit, as Louise says, sit in that coordination role. They then champion some of these templates, these initiatives that we're trying to embed across all of the projects, and then they will have some responsibility and oversight for the completion of what we're calling our performance checklist, which is where we're trying to extract the data. Those performance checklists are attached to our financial system. So where we've got details about the client, we're also going to have details about, hopefully, the embodied carbon and water consumption and everything else. And then that process, just to ensure it works effectively, has an approval process. So that's where we hope we can ensure that there's that robustness in the data. So my team will do that check. So entered by somebody that sort of knows what they're doing, and then oversight from my team to ensure that it's robust and accurate and all talking the same language.
Great. So Philip, I'm just on the last few minutes, so I'm going to start with you, and we're going to go backwards, end on Ben. But really, just that final question, really, in terms of any final thoughts to share with our kind of our peers and our community here, in terms of how I suppose we've talked about how we set up in quite a lot of detail. But is there anything you'd really like to add in terms of how we can do this and what we should do, and what's your next steps, really?
Yeah, no, I don't think there's much more to add. I think just one of the observations from the last 18, 24 months is that everybody's trying to do their own thing to some extent, all in a slightly different way. And we've touched on some of those points, but even into the industry groups, the industry bodies, UKGBC, the CIBCs, the LETIs, there are lots of documents that all say the same sort of thing. And actually having a single source of truth on some of these issues would be useful. I don't know how we manifest that. I don't know how we deliver that, but I think there's a role for RIBA to play in contributing to that sort of overarching position.
Okay, Philip. Alex, are you taking note to that? I think maybe this what comes in. I know that the UKGBC is writing quite a big piece of work just now, which is going to be released in a few months. So all the work that we've been doing, all of us through the lockdown, that's all going to be collated together under a UKGBC banner. So I think that's the one where we're hoping that's going to be the kernel of that. So Louisa, on to you. Final parting thoughts. Can we do this? And let's crack on. So what's your parting thoughts?
I think we can. I'm going to go back to my last slide, I suppose, and it's about just making it the responsibility of everyone who's working on a project from part one all the way up to partner and beyond. Everyone can do their piece, whether it's advocacy or whether it's whether it's direct production or direct influence. And I'm quite excited about the climate literacy program, for example. I think that will be a good step forwards in ensuring everyone's got that baseline knowledge, and hopefully through that developing a bit more confidence around it and a lot more knowledge to then go delve deeper. So yeah, I think it's having a number of specialists who can impart their knowledge and best practice, but making sure everyone is brought up and has the confidence to talk and deliver.
Great, thanks, Lisa. And I did just another plug there. Sort of the RIBA team are working on a new guide in terms of upskilling, in terms of education. So the carbon literacies, which obviously you know about, that should be released beginning of next year. So Ben, just in terms of parting thoughts, and I know when we spoke a few years ago about the 2030 challenge, and it's almost like careful what you wish for, isn't it, Ben? So what's your parting thoughts? Ben, you're on mute again.
My reflections are simplicity. So I like what Louisa said about that. I think simplicity of process, but of built form, of detail, and so on. I have another guiding principle, really, which is about incremental change is just as important, if not more important, than the individual perfectly formed, stellar examples. I think case studies have their place, but the message I'm trying to give is that every single project and every single team must strive to make incremental improvements, because if we don't do that, we won't get to 2050 and net zero. So I think that's really important. And collaboration. So that's why we're going to collaborate with, in quite a structured piece of work with 3 other housing practices who share exactly the same kinds of problems that we do. But we would also very, very much like to collaborate more widely with other early adopters. And we're very open to sharing what we've done, the techniques we've used, and the processes that we've evolved, because I think there's mutual advantage to be gained there.
That's great. Okay, I'd just like to end there. We're a couple of minutes over, but I'd like to thank all our speakers from HDA, from BDP, and obviously Hawkins Brown. So just give everybody a round of applause there, and thanks very much for you attending. So.